All right, today's daf in Masechet Avodah Zarah is Lamed Aleph 31, and we are at 2 lines from the bottom of daf Lamed Amud Bet. These are, fascinating, and obviously Avodah Zarah is a very interesting Masechet because it deals fundamentally with our interactions with non-Jews, which of course, as Jews in the exile, we do all the time. But of course, they dealt with a lot of Babylonian Jews and some Roman Jews, not Jews, Babylonian religions and Romans. They didn't really deal with Europeans very much. So a lot of this changed over time. But of course, these halachot are very, very relevant and important. And today we get to Reb Asi and Reb Yochanan, 2 lines in the bottom of Daf Lamed Amud Bet. Says Reb Asi and Reb Yochanan, Mishum Reb Yehuda ben Betera, Shlosha Yenotein. There's 3 problems. There's 3 levels of problems with different types of wine. First of all, there's yain nesach, right? There's wine that has been religiously utilized for an idol. So that is idol worship. And that is asur bahana. Of course, you can't use the wine. You can't drink the wine. You can't use the wine. And not only that, but the wine itself is tameh. Umitama tumah chamurak b'kazayit. It's like a dead body, essentially. It's mitameh tumah chamura. Even a kazayit ba'ohel would be mitameh, because remember, we have a halacha that avodah zarah is like mitim, we talked about yesterday. And so it's like a dead body. So that's the highest level of Isur. The next level, top of Daf Lamed Aleph and Aleph, is Stam Yinam. This is wine that is owned by a non-Jew, but not by a non-Jew, by an Ovei Kochavim, which of course becomes a huge distinction as time goes on between, the Rambam makes this distinction between Goyim who worship idols and the Rambam's Goyim who are Muslims who didn't worship idols, right? But Stam Yinam, which means wine owned by an Ovei Kochavim, which you don't know that he's used it for worship. He just owns it. So then you have to worry that maybe he used it for worship, or it's like Zarah, Rashi says, and it's asur bahana. You can't drink that wine. You can't sell that wine. But it's not mitame tuman mate, but it's mitame tuman mashkin b'revi'it. It's mitame automatically like other liquids, so it's mitame foods. It's just not mitame people. That's the second level. And the third level is hamafkid yeno eitzel v'kochavim. If you have a Jew who owns wine, but they give it to a non-Jew to watch or to touch. So it's basically touched potentially by a non-Jew. So then it's a lower level, and it is asur b'shtiya. You can't drink it because who knows what the non-Jew did with it. But it's mutar b'hana'ah. But you can sell it, you can buy it, you can do it for business. So why? How in the world could you say that? If you gave it to the non-Jew, why isn't it like it was in his property? V'atznan. We have a Mishnah in Dimai which says hamafki perotav etzol v'kochavim. If you give your fruit to a non-Jew, right? Your fruit that, let's say you already took off truma, maaser, you give it to the non-Jew, you have no way of knowing what he did with it. He might have switched it for other fruit, right? And so harei hein kiperotav shovei kochavim l'shvi'etu l'maaser. You have to treat it like it potentially is not the food you gave him. You gave him a sack of grain, perot will say, a sack of olives, right? Or whatever. Yeah, olives are a good example. You go pick it up. You can't assume it's the same one. He might have switched it out, and therefore it's tevel or shmita, let's say. So why don't you worry about the same thing about wine? If you gave your wine to a non-Jew, even though you're the owner, why is it different than wine that's owned by a non-Jew? Says it would be, but the case here in our statement of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera was kigon sheyichad lo keren zavit. It's where you set aside a secure place. And Rashi says it has to be a lock and key, of course, right? But you set aside a secure place in the house of the Ovei Kochavim, and you put your wine there, and you lock the door. So you close the door. So it says, well, if that's the case, so why can't you drink it, right? If it's lock and key, right? It's like our wine. You put our wine in a store, and it's owned by a non-Jew, but it's sealed. We drink it. So why can't you even drink this wine? Isn't there a case, this is a very interesting case we quote, now 7 lines or so from the top. Rabbi Yochanan ikla leparud. Yochanan went on summer vacation, and he went to a place called Parud. I don't know exactly where Parud is, but it's somewhere in Israel, I'm guessing. Well, I'm not guessing. It's somewhere in Israel, right? And Rabbi Yochanan went to this place. Now, this place was very famous because it was the hometown of Bar Kapara. Now, Bar Kapara was not alive. It was the hometown, he went to visit the museum of Bar Kapara. But he said to the people, he went to the deli, and he said, Yesh Mishnat Bar Kapara. Does anybody learn, anyone here knew something from Bar Kapara? You went in a shir, you heard something. Does anyone know a teaching of Bar Kapara? And Tanale, and they taught him, a person named Rabbi Tanchum, who was from Parud, from that place, said, Oh, I remember learning this from Bar Kapara. It says, this Bar Kapara taught us a Braita, Hamafkid yeno eitzel goy, that if you give your wine to be watched by a non-Jew, and presuming you lock it up and they don't have access to it, mutar b'shtiyah, you're allowed to drink it. Rabbi Yochanan was so excited to hear this. Kariel, and he said the pasuk in Kohelet of Makom Shibal Eitz Sham Yu. If a tree falls, it's going to be in that place. What do you mean? Of course, it's going to be Sham Yu. It's not going to be there anymore. It fell. What do you mean it's not gedaitach? Ella sham yihei perotav. If a tree falls, Rashi says the tree, of course, is the great man Bar Kapara. If a great scholar falls, the legacy of that person will be in the place because the people there will remember what he taught them and what they learned from him over the years. So Rabbi Yochanan was very excited by this. But you see from here that if you give your wine to a non-Jew and you trust that he can't touch it because it's locked up or something, you can even drink it. So why did we say it's mutar b'hana'ah but asur b'shti'ah? Says Reb Zera, you're right. That is the halacha according to one Tana. But there's a machloket Tanaim. Lokashia ha-Reb Eliezer ha-Rabbanan. There's a machloket between Reb Eliezer and Rabbanan exactly about this issue. If you have wine, you're a Jew, you take your wine and you give it to a non-Jew to watch and you lock it up, are you allowed to drink that wine, or do you have to worry that maybe the non-Jew undid the lock, picked the lock, broke the seal, got in, took some of your wine, or switched it with his own wine? And what's the Braita that talks about this? Titania. So you have a Braita that says the following. Whether you purchase or you rent a house in the middle of a courtyard of a non-Jew. So the non-Jew, Ovei Kochavim, has the whole courtyard. You own a house in the middle, so he's got access to your house. Right, and then your storehouse. And you fill it up with wine. But you have the key or the lock, right? So basically, it's in his property or he has access, but you locked it. So what's the halacha? Rabbi Eliezer matir. Rabbi Eliezer says no problem. You can do this. You can drink it. No, nothing wrong. And the chachamim osrim. Chachamim say you're not allowed to do this because you're basically giving the non-Jew access to your thing, even though it's locked up. Now, as Rashi points out, I think Mar's going to go through it in a minute. It's asur to do it, but if you do it, it doesn't mean it's asur ba'ana. It just means you're not supposed to do it and you can't drink the wine, right? So that's the machloket between whether the Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera said you can't drink it, and Rabbi Yochanan said you can drink it. Amar Rabbi Chia, or Bar Kapar said you can drink it. Amar Rabbi Chia breder Rabbi Chia bar Nachmeni. Now Rabbi Chia said Rabbi Chia, the son of Rabbi Chia bar Nachmeni, said in the name of Rabbi Chisda, Amar Rav. And some said Amar Chisda Amar Zeiri, Amar Chisda Amar Li Abba Bar Chama, whoever said it, Hachi Amar Zeiri, this was said in the name of Zeiri, Halacha Rebbe Eliezer. Halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer that you're allowed to drink the wine. It's mutar, even to b'shtiyah, as long as there's a lock, so the non-Jew can't touch it. Now, of course, again, sometimes you worry that they'll pick the lock, or they'll go to effort, or they'll forge the lock. But it's effort. You don't have to worry about them doing it if you have no proof or reason to think that they've done it. Amar Rebbe Eliezer, now said Rebbe Eliezer, the Amora, Hakom mishtamer b'chotam echad. You know, everything that is watched with one chotam, right? You give your meat to a non-Jew, usually you have to worry that they're going to switch it out for treif meat, right? You give produce, you have to worry they're going to switch it out. But if you've got a seal, that's enough. Chutz min hayayin, except for wine, because yayin netzach is so chamer. She'ein mishtamer b'chotam echad. One seal is not enough. You might need two seals, which is of course what we do on our wine. And Rabbi Yochanan says, "I feel yayin mishtamer b'chotam echad." No, wine, even one seal is enough. And lo pligi, they're not arguing about how to interpret the Tanaim. It's just that there's different Tanaim. Hak Rebbe Eliezer, Hak Rabbanan. Rebbe Eliezer was Mekel, and Rabbanan were Machmir. Ikadaminal, some say that Rebbe Eliezer said, "Hakol mishtamer b'chotam metochota." No. Everything needs two seals. You need to have a seal within a seal, right? Chutz min hayayin, except for wine, which that's not enough. She'ein mishtamer b'chotam metochotam. One seal on tied of another seal is not enough. Wine would be prohibited, even if it was sealed, because we're worried that the non-Jew is going to break the seal, and you won't notice, right? And Rabbi Yochanan says, no. I feel yayin, wine also is okay with the chotam b'toch chotam. Yayin mishtamer b'chotam b'toch chotam. And again, this case, you'd have to say Travayik Rabbanan. They're both going according to the Rabbanan, which is a little strange, because we just passed like Rebbe Eliezer, right? But that they're both going to Rabbanan, who say it's asur to do this. But Mar Safar, one opinion of Rabbi Yochanan is Pligi Rabbanan led Rebbe Eliezer. When the Rabbanan argued with Rebbe Eliezer, it's b'chotam echad. It's when there's only one seal. And the Rabbanan say that's not enough. Rebbe Eliezer, you're too kind. You're too generous, right? One seal is not enough. Ava b'chotam, b'toch chotam shara. But the Rabbanan would agree that if it's two seals, it's not a problem. Marsavar, but the other opinion, the Rebbe Elazar's opinion, is that afilu chotam b'to chotam asri, that the Rabbanan would aser regardless. You can never give your thing to a non-Jew if it's wine, because you can never trust him. Now, ask the Gemara very practically. Of course, we don't do it this way, but heichidami chotam b'to chotam. What's an example of one seal within another seal? Like, what does that mean? So Amar Rava says, Rava, I'll give you a couple examples. Let's say you take an agna, right? You take a agna, it's like a barrel, like a
Basin of corn.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the word I was going for. The puma de chavita, you put it on the head, on the mouth of the barrel. Shrika v'chatim, you smear it and you seal it, meaning it's not just you put a bucket on top of it, because you can just move that. But it means you do something like we have, with a little wax. They didn't use wax, it was necessarily, they used clay. But you basically, seal it up so that you would notice if it was broken. That is a seal. The barrel has its own seal. And then a second seal is the clay on top of it. But if you don't do that, that's not a chotam b'to chotam. And the next case is dikula umahadik. Let's say you take a basket, right? Well, a basket, of course, can be moved. But let's say you're mahadik, you tie it on, right? Meaning you sew the basket in a way that we could tell if it was unsewed. So then, havichotam b'to chotam. So then again, if it's attached, it's chotam b'to chotam because you have the barrel seal and you have the basket. Lo mahadek, if the basket is just on top of it but not attached, then lo havichotam b'to chotam. And the third case is, and these I guess were all things that they did in their practices, right? Node b'diskaya. Let's say you have a node. A node is a skin, right, of like a wine skin, right? The thing you hold that you put the wine in, the node, and you put it inside a diskaya. Diskaya is some kind of bag that you would put it in. So basically, you have two containers, right? It's like double bagging it. You have the actual flask, we'll call it, which is what a node is. It was made out of leather, probably, right? Or skin. So you had a flask, and you put it inside a sack. So says Rabbi Rav, this is Rav, right? Yeah, it says Rav, sorry. Something very interesting. If you have chatimat piv lamata, if the opening of the flask is downwards, then havichotam chotam. Because then basically you have to untie the top bag. You have to turn the flask upside down and untie it. So it's a lot of work, and people are going to be discouraged from doing it. But if piv lamala, but you know what? If the opening is the same place, then it's not considered to be chotam b'to chotam, because presumably you can open it all maybe with one action. It's not a lot of work, and we have to worry that they're going to break that seal. However, if you bend the neck of the flask inside, right, and sayar v'chatim, and you Rashi understands, so you tie this and you seal it, right? So sayar means you tie it, chatim means you put a seal on top of it. That's considered to be chotam b'to chotam, and that's very similar to what we do on our bottles of wine, right? With a cork, which is considered to be a seal, and then something on top of the cork, right? They put whatever the either some people use wax, some people use just the covering, either way, but you have something on top of it. So that is one of the ways that we get around this problem. Now, very interestingly, and this is a very, very interesting halacha and very practical, is what about a kuti, right? So kutim, now this gets very complicated because kutim were variably treated, sorry?
Before you go on, I kept thinking about the fact that I buy kosher grape juice from non-Jewish owned stores all the time, and they sell a lot of it.
Right. So again, I'm not here to paskin anyways, but first of all, I would say, remember we had a discussion yesterday, I think, about yain mevushal, right? So grape juice is cooked, so that might not be an issue even to begin with. But let's say that's not a heter because it wasn't always mevushal. The fact of a seal within a seal, right? It's somewhat arbitrary according to many halachot that we go with, which is that it's not that you need two seals. You need to discourage someone from doing this, right? You can always forge something, right? If you put enough effort in, there's all the stories about the old fancy wine bottles that are full with, kedem, right? So someone opened up the cork and took it out and put something. You could do that, right? But it's not people don't do it because it's a lot of effort. So the seal within another seal is effort. So there's those who argue that when we have really good seals like we have today, maybe the Kedem grape juice bottle, that counts as a chotam b'to chotam, and that counts as two seals. But either way, that's one opinion. Remember we said earlier the halacha is like Rebbe Eliezer, maybe you only need one seal anyways. So obviously the OU is dealing with this issue. Continues the Gemara, though, the next really interesting thing, we're just going to do it actually very briefly here, is what about a kuti, right? So the kutim were not real converts, we said, right? They weren't really believing, they only did it because they were afraid. So we sometimes treat them like Jews, we sometimes treat them like non-Jews, but they don't worship idols, right? So in some ways, they're like non-Jews who are not Ovdei Kochavim, right? So what about their wine? So says the Braita, Tanur Rabbanan, says the Braita, B'Rishonah Yomrim, initially they used to say, the Yayin shel Ein Kushi, a wine that comes from the city of Ein Kushi, which was a Kuti city, not Kushi, but Kuti city, is Asur. And why is it Asur? They don't do Nisuch HaYayin. It's because they don't, although they don't personally do Nisuch, they don't mind if a non-Jew touches their wine, so they don't protect their wine. So you have to assume that a goy, a Ovei Kochavim, who lives nearby, came into the store and touched the barrel. Mipnei Birat Srika, there's a city called Srika, Birat Srika, which is a city of idol worshippers right next to Ein Kushi. And if you talk about the city of Parkata, right, the wine of Barkata is also Asur Mipnei Kfar Parshai. There's a city next to it of the Avodah Zarah called Kfar Parshai. And Shel Zagdor, Zaresh. The city of Zagdor, which again is a Kushi city, is Asur, a Kuti city, is Asur Mipnei Kfar Shalem, because there's a city called Shalem next to it, which is a non-Jewish city. So that's what they initially said. But then they changed their mind. Chazru Lomar, they said, you know what? Chaviot p'tuchot asurot. Like if the barrel's open and you walk into the store and you say, can I get a pitcher of wine? You have to assume that a non-Jew touched that barrel and you can't drink it. But stumot mutarot, if it's an unopened barrel, you can buy the barrel because you can assume it was never touched by a non-Jew. Says Gemara, why? Why'd they change their opinion? Meikar my saver, b'sof my saver. What was the initial thought and what changed? So Meikar saver, initially they thought, look, Ein kuti makbid al magagoy. A kuti does not care if a non-Jew, an ovei kochavim, right? Is the girsai of maga ovei kochavim. So you can't assume they didn't protect it. Lo shnap tuchot, lo shnat stumot. They don't care who touches the barrels, so you can assume that a non-Jew, an ovei kochavim, touched the barrel. But the besof they suffer, they thought, look, these guys are not idiots; they're businessmen, right? They think, look, if I want to ever sell to a Jew, I've got to make sure that no non-Jew touches this barrel. So if it's open, then everyone touches it already. No one's going to buy from me. So I don't care if a non-Jew touches it. But kilo kapit up tuchot, they don't care if it's open. But astumot mikbid kapit. But if it's a sealed barrel, they are very careful not to have anyone non-Jewish touch it because they want to be able to sell it to the Jews. Ask the Gemara, is that true? Is stumot mutarot? Would you really believe that if it's sealed, they're allowed to sell it to a Jew, even though they are not makbid on them touching it because we think they will protect it for the Jew? For a minute, what about the following Braita? Turn the page, Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Bet. The Braita says the following: Hasholech chavit shel yain biyad kuti. Let's say you have a moving company, right? And you send your barrel of wine through a kuti who's a non-Jew, right? Who's a kuti. Again, a lot of this depends on whether kutim are considered non-Jews. Then remember, they made a takana eventually to treat them like Ovdei Avodah Zarah. So these halachot might all be pre the takana. But let's just say he's a kuti, and you send a barrel of wine. So meaning, if he does not a problem, but if a non-Jew touches it, Ovdei Avodah Zarah touches it, it's a problem. Or says the Braita, shel tzir v'shel murias. Remember, tzir and murias are these different fish oils and bones, basically, that were very, very good for cooking, but they contained kosher fish, and you're afraid, of course, that someone non-Jewish will switch the fish out, right? This is high quality fish. I'll switch it out with something low quality, which is not kosher. So if you send that biyad goy, says the Braita, im makir chotamo v'stamo mutar. If you recognize the seal and it's still sealed, you can vouch for it, then you're allowed to use it. But im lav asur, but if you don't recognize the seal, it's asur because maybe a non-Jew touched it. But you just said that a kuti cares that a non-Jew won't touch the barrel of wine that's closed. Amrei B'Zer says, well, it's no kasha. Kambi or kambaderach. It depends. If you're in the store in the city, then they're very careful, right? They won't let any non-Jew go near the unopened barrels because they want to be able to sell them to a Jew. But if you're on the road, you can't protect what's on the road. You're out there, you're traveling, you don't know what's happening. And so on the road, you have to be much more cautious. Matka for Yirmiyah, asked Yirmiyah the beautiful question, 5 lines from the top. I don't get it. How do you think the wine gets to the store, right? It has to go on the road. It doesn't grow in the store. Right? It's such a great question for people who live in cities, right? Where do you think your food comes from, right? So certainly what's in the store came from the road. So why aren't you worried that on its trip from the vineyard to the store, a non-Jew touched it and the kuti wasn't makbid? Elam Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Rabbi Yirmiyah, you're right. You probably would have to worry about that. But the specific heter we had in Amud Aleph was Bein Hagitot Shaninu. You're talking about someone who's either has a store that's near the wine press, right? Meaning it's like the, what do they call it? The winery, right? You're in the winery essentially. Kivan dekuli alma afchi, because everyone there is everyone's around, right? Everyone's at the time of the press, it's a big party, and everyone's going to taste the wine and buy the wine, and therefore mirtat, they are afraid. And this is, of course, the big word in all of kashrut, right? It's what we rely on for everything, is the fear. That there's fear that they assume they won't do it. A kuti will not let a non-Jew touch the wine. Amar, because he said, Hashti chazuli mafsirili. If they see me being loose with my wine and a non-Jew touching it, no one's going to buy from me, and I'm going to lose all my money. So it's not in my economic self-interest to have someone non-Jewish touch my wine, and therefore you can trust them. And of course, we rely on this super extensively in everything, right? Because we say, a person who has ashgacha, right? You put a camera, let's say, you're not there 24 hours necessarily, but they're afraid that you're going to find out that they violated it, and then they're not going to be able to sell to the Jews. And so therefore, we rely on this for the kuti and potentially in many other situations. Now, Itmar, says the Gemara, a fascinating discussion. We are around 8 lines from the top. Says the Gemara, Mipnei ma asru shechar shel goyim. Why did they say you can't buy beer from a non-Jew or ovei kochavim? Now, Tosfos falls off his chair. What do you mean? We never in our lives heard of a Mishnah or a Braita or a Tosefta ever say in the list. We have a whole list, right? Our Mishnah said a whole list of what you can't buy. Elu dvarim shel ovei kochavim asurim. Beer did not show up on that list. We've never in our lives heard of beer of ovei kochavim being asur. So it says it must be that sometime after the Mishnah in Bavel, they made a takana. We have no recollection. We have no knowledge of who made it, why they made it, but they made it. Well, we're going to find out why, but we know they made it. So ask the Gemara now why. Why did they say you can't drink beer of a non-Jew? Right? Of course, they're not going to pour beer in front of their idols. So why is it asur? Amar Bichama bar Amar Yitzchak, Rami bar Chama, Amar Yitzchak said, Mipnei Mishum Chatznut. It's because, Rashi points it out, you go to his house, you have a beer, you'll see his daughter, next thing you know, you'll be married. So we are worried about relations. We're worried about someone befriending a non-Jew, Oved Avodah Zarah, and marrying into the family. Rav Nachman says, no, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with Shemgila. It's a health issue, like we had before about cheese. We're going to have it again. We're afraid that they don't care about their health. They're not makbid. They don't get all the right vaccines. No, that's not what it means. They don't care about the snakes, and they let the snakes put venom into their liver. Says Gemara, what are you talking about? Igule demai. What do you mean it's going to be exposed? When are you worried that the beer is going to be exposed? If you're worried about being exposed when it's nazyata, means when it's in the initial vat where they prepare it, who cares? Where you have to keep it exposed, right? Because the gases come up and the carbon dioxide, it'll blow up if it's closed. But ananami megalina, we also leave our beer exposed. We don't care about snakes. Don't eat that kind of. Don't go into beer. Ela de chavita. No, we're worried more about when you finish the beer and you put it in the barrels. Well, so what? Ananami megalina. We also expose our beer, and the snakes don't put the snake. Whatever. There's no poison in beer. Lo tzricha, maybe, which is why they probably drank beer. But lo tzricha ba'atra dematzlumayim. It's talking about a place where they used water to brew the beer, basically. So meaning, or Russians, they put the water to let it settle, right? And they used the water first. They filled up water. Then I guess they added the hops or whatever they used. They used dates in there, but they added the dates. And so, but the water, when it was sitting there, was pure water and it was exposed, and the snakes might have put venom into that. Well, if that's the problem, so let's say it's old beer, you should be able to drink it because we have a Kabbalah Dama Rebbe, Yashan Mutar. Any water that's old is mutar because if there's poison in it, it will go bad. The fact that it didn't go bad means there's no poison in it. So it should be mutar or hichmitz mutar. Or what if it got hichmitz means like sour, right? It should be permitted. Because ain't like vinegar, because poison will not allow it to happen. And just well, you're right, it should be permitted, but gzera yashana tu chadash. They just prohibited all beer because new beer could be poisoned, and so they said don't drink beer. The Ovdei Kochavim are not concerned with the levels of hygiene that we think are important, and therefore don't drink their beer. Of course, if that's the reason, and you have a health department that's worried, it should get rid of the whole problem, right? But anyways, that is one of the reasons that it could be, either because of chatznut, of interactions, or it could be because of poison. Now, if Papa, who was obviously not obviously, but he was a rabbi in Bavel, he loved his beer, but he said we can't drink the beer. So he would do this. He would go to the store and buy the beer, but he wouldn't drink it in the store. He would drink it on the gate outside. He would sit only outside in the bar because then you're not hanging out with them, right? So he would go and drink the beer, but only drink it on the entrance. Aveshatin, he would drink it there. And Rav Achai said, no, he would bring it home. The Beit he would bring the beer home. Now, they probably didn't have packaging, so he was probably walking with a cup of beer, right? Vishati, and he would drink it at home. And Tavar Mishul Chatzut. Obviously, they both understand that the prohibition is because they don't want you to interact with them. So as long as you make some separation, it's okay. Obviously, if it was because of poison, then it wouldn't be permitted to bring it home. And Rav Achai was just a little frummer, right? He made a little more hachak and he brought it home. Now, Rav Shmuel Bar Bisna, there's a story of Rav Shmuel Bar Bisna, was another Amora, Ikla Margavan. He came to a place called Margavan, which was very famous for their beer, I guess. And they brought him some wine. He didn't said, no thanks, I don't drink your wine. Then they brought him beer because they thought, like, when I go to a restaurant, they bring me a cup of beer. He didn't drink that either. So he says, well, I don't get it. I understand you don't drink wine because it's shemetz. Shemetz means as it might have been connected for yain nesach, it's stam yenam. But shechar mishum mai, why didn't he drink the beer? And he said mishum shimsa de shimsa, because it's a trace of a trace, a little bit. It sounds a lot. It reminds us of wine. Now, Amar Rav. Now, Rav says something very interesting. Hi shikra dharma ashari. The beer that's from the Arameans, the arama, is permitted to drink. I'm not worried about that shikra. But, says Rav, the classic statement, but I don't let my son have it. My son can't drink it. Says, well, 1 second. This sounds like the most elite thing you've ever heard. Manavshach. Ishari, if Rav holds it's permitted, then tell people it's permitted and let your son drink it. The Kuliyam Shari. The Kuliyam Asr. If it's prohibited, it should be prohibited to everyone. What are you talking about? Ella says more clearly, Rav Savar Mishum Giluya. Rav said the reason you can't drink beer is because it's poison, right? However, the kind of beer they make in Arma, the kind of beer, the Armenian beer has, let's read this inside, Azo mirora de kishuta v'kali lezihira. The bitterness of the kishuta is the hops that they use for the beer, weakens the poison. Udilaki makile. Now, but if you're weak, meaning you have bad, as we used to call it, a poor constitution, then the beer is even worse for you. So general people can drink it because the fact that it's Armenian beer means that it neutralizes the poison that's potentially there. But my kid Chia, he's a weak kid. He's an indoor kid. Chia Bri, lucky, since he's ill, I guess he had some kind of illness. Lo nishtimine, I don't want him to drink it, not because of he's more firm than everyone. He's not as healthy as everybody, and it's a health issue. Now, finally, let's just finish today's daf because that's what we do in Daf Yomi. Amar Shmuel, 7 lines from the bottom. Kol hashratzim yeshlam eres. All snakes. We always talk about snakes putting their poison into liquids. The truth is, all shratzim, all venom. What are they called? Scorpions and all kinds of things that are creepy, crawly things. They all have poison. But shel nachash meimit. The reason we care about snakes so much is because the poison of the snakes can kill you. Shel shratzim eno meimit. The poison from the other animals, it just harms you, but it doesn't kill you. Amrle Shmuel Chia bar Rav. So Shmuel said to Chia bar Rav, bar Aryeh, the son of the lion. That's what they called Rav, right? So you're the son of Rav. Let me tell you something your father used to tell us. Your father Rav used to tell us that Hani Arma'ai Zukanai. These Aramean are Zukanai, which is Zukanai means they are edematous, right? They blow up. They have big beer bellies, maybe, or they're nafuchim, which means they're full of hot air. But it merely means that they swell up, which probably means they have edema, right? And that's mishon deshatu galuya because they don't care about what they drink. They drink things that have been exposed. They get poison in them all the time. They're exposed to all kinds of bad things, but they don't die. Haindelo mighty, right? We're all worried about dying from it. They don't die from it because they eat all kinds of bad things. They eat McDonald's all the time. That's how much shkatzim ramasim, right? They eat all kinds of things. They have all kinds of bad toxins in themselves anyways. So essentially they're stronger. So their bodies are used to this kind of junk, and so they can drink it and not die. But of course, they're not healthy, right? They're swollen. They have all kinds of diseases, but they don't die from it. So that's why. Amr of Yosef let's just read a couple more lines. Why not? Says Rav Yosef, the top words now of Lamed Bet Amid Aleph. Hai chala d'shichva darma asur. You know, if you have chala, which is the vinegar from beer of Aramayim, is asur because the Arvi Beidur died the yain nesach, because they could mix inside of it the dregs of yain nesach. Rav Ashi otzar shari. Says Rav Ashi, but if it comes from their otzar, from the storehouse, it's permitted. Meaning, if it's been there for a long time, it's mutter given them arvi be misra sorry, because if you put wine into that, it will get rotten. So the fact that it didn't get rotten means that there's no wine mixed into it, and therefore, since it comes from beer, it would be permitted, not like wine. So you can tell, we'll stop here and we'll pick it up tomorrow morning, but you can tell from here that they had a little bit of a mixed relationship with beer, right? We said it's usher, but then many had terim to drink it, and maybe if it's different kind of beer, Aramean beer, there's a whole debate in the Rishonim about what about our beer, right? Because of course they made beer from dates, we make beer from grains, right? So does that even include it? There's a Ramah that says it's not a problem, Tosfos says it is a problem. Anyways, a lot of practical things that are not for Daf Yomi, but we'll stop here and we'll pick it up tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m.
Beer was made from barley in ancient times in Mesopotamia. I don't know about Israel.
Well, in the Gemara, right? So in Bava, we almost always talk about shecher of tamarim, but I'm not sure if that's the only way.
Yeah.
Anyways, we will continue tomorrow morning. In a few hours, we'll see you all at 7:45 a.m. Shavua Tov.
So.